There comes a moment in every life when endurance quietly transforms into exhaustion. You may not notice it at first. It arrives disguised as patience, loyalty, or resilience. But beneath the surface, something vital begins to erode. This is the moment when the soul realizes it has been negotiating its own worth. Saying no more is not an act of rebellion, it is an act of remembrance. It is the instant you stop abandoning yourself in order to belong, to be loved, or to keep the peace. For a long time you may have believed that love required sacrifice of the self. You learned to adapt, to shrink, to carry what was never yours to carry. You told yourself that understanding others meant silencing your own needs. But the psyche does not forget what the mind tries to justify. Every ignored boundary becomes an inner fracture. Every unspoken truth turns inward, manifesting as fatigue, resentment, or a quiet loss of meaning. The self does not disappear, it waits. When you finally say no more, something ancient stirs within you. This refusal is not directed at others, it is directed at the inner pattern that taught you to betray yourself. You begin to recognize how often your compassion was actually fear in disguise, fear of rejection, fear of being alone, fear of not being enough. Saying no more breaks this unconscious contract. It signals the end of self-erasure and the beginning of inner alignment. At first, this awakening of self-love feels uncomfortable. Guilt arises, doubt questions your right to change. Old identities protest because they were built on compliance. But this discomfort is not a sign of selfishness, it is the growing pain of integration. You are no longer split between who you are and who you pretend to be. Energy once spent on maintaining false harmony returns to you as clarity, strength, and grounded presence. Self-love after no more is not loud or performative. It is quiet, steady, and rooted. You stop explaining yourself to those who cannot hear you. You choose honesty over approval. You recognize that love which requires self-abandonment is not love but repetition of an old wound. In this awareness you reclaim your authority over your inner world. Eventually you discover that saying no more does not close your heart, it protects it. Relationships either deepen in truth or fall away in silence. Both outcomes serve your wholeness. You no longer seek validation to confirm your worth because worth is no longer up for debate. What awakens is a self-love born not from affirmation, but from the courage to remain loyal to your own soul. This is the hidden power of no more. It is not an ending. It is the moment you stop living from unconscious survival and begin living from conscious self-respect. And once this self-love awakens, you realize it was always waiting for you to choose yourself. Saying no more is a profound act that goes far beyond refusing a request or setting a simple boundary. It is an act of remembering who you are at your core. Many of us live our lives negotiating our value, constantly giving away pieces of ourselves in the name of love, duty, or acceptance. We adapt to others' expectations, soften our truths, and compromise our desires, believing that this is the way to maintain harmony, to be liked, or to avoid conflict. Over time, this pattern becomes so ingrained that we forget we are doing it. We forget that our own voice, our own needs, and our own integrity are just as important as anyone else's. Saying no more is the moment of awakening that reminds us we have a right to exist fully without apology. It is not an act aimed at punishing others or pushing them away, but rather a declaration to ourselves that our life, energy, and heart are not negotiable. It is a reclaiming of personal sovereignty, a way of telling ourselves that we will no longer allow patterns that diminish us to continue. This is the inner reminder that we are worthy of respect, care, and attention, even I. The world around us does not immediately recognize it. The act of saying no more often comes with resistance, both internal and external. Internally, we may feel guilt or fear. We have been conditioned to believe that putting ourselves first is selfish or wrong. Fear whispers that saying no could lead to rejection, conflict, or loneliness. Guilt may emerge as we worry about disappointing others or breaking unspoken obligations. Yet, this internal discomfort is not a signal to back down. It is a signal that we are finally acknowledging our needs, our limits, and our value. Saying no more requires courage because it disrupts the familiar rhythm of compliance and overextension. Externally, others may react with confusion, anger, or even resentment. This is not a reflection of wrongdoing on your part, but of their unfamiliarity with boundaries and self-respect. Often people are accustomed to us giving more than we should, to overextending in ways that deny our wholeness. Our refusal challenges that pattern, and their reactions are part of the process of breaking old dynamics. At its essence, saying no more is a remembrance. It is the moment when we stop living on autopilot, automatically accommodating others at the expense of our own well-being. It reconnects us to our inner compass, to the voice that has been muted by habit, fear, or obligation. It reminds us that our life is not a resource to be depleted for the comfort of others, but a sacred space that deserves care, attention, and respect. This act of self-remembrance cultivates awareness, clarity, and authenticity. When we honor ourselves in this way, we are able to engage with others from a place of wholeness rather than scarcity, from presence rather than compulsion. Saying no more is the conscious acknowledgement that our existence matters, that our energy is valuable, and that we are entitled to live in alignment with our truth, unapologetically and with love for ourselves intact. Self-betrayal is one of the most subtle and insidious forces in human life, because it often masquerades as duty, love, or responsibility. It begins quietly in the small compromises we make to please others or to avoid discomfort. At first, these concessions may seem harmless, staying silent when we want to speak, agreeing to obligations we cannot fulfill, prioritizing someone else's needs over our own. Each act of self-betrayal might feel like an isolated choice, a minor concession in the flow of life, but over time these moments accumulate. They create a gap between who we are inside and the persona we project to the outside world. This gap is the fertile ground for inner conflict, a tension that builds silently until it becomes impossible to ignore. The human psyche is designed for alignment. When our thoughts, feelings, and actions are in harmony, we feel grounded, clear, and capable of authentic connection. When we betray ourselves, even in small ways, that harmony is disrupted. The inner conflict often begins subtly, as feelings of unease or dissatisfaction. We may experience a nagging sense of frustration, sadness, or restlessness that seems to have no clear source. Sometimes it shows up as self-doubt or anxiety, a whispering question of whether we are living rightly, authentically, or in alignment with our true nature. These emotional signals are not random. They are the mind and body attempting to draw our attention to the incongruence between our choices and our authentic self. Self-betrayal also has the effect of fragmenting the self. When we act against our own needs or values, we create a division within our consciousness. One part of us follows the imposed rules, obligations, or expectations, while the other part quietly protests, holding the truth of our desires, boundaries, and feelings. This internal fragmentation can manifest as tension, irritability, fatigue, or even confusion about identity. We may find ourselves repeating patterns of dissatisfaction in relationships, work, or personal endeavors because the unacknowledged self is seeking expression and integration. The conflict demands awareness because the psyche cannot remain divided indefinitely. It seeks resolution, coherence, and wholeness. Eventually, the accumulation of self-betrayal reaches a tipping point. The internal discomfort intensifies, no longer allowing us to ignore it. This may appear as sudden emotional upheaval, repeated frustrations, or life events that challenge our habitual patterns. These experiences serve as a mirror, reflecting the unresolved tension back to us. The soul demands recognition. It demands that we pay attention to what has been neglected or denied. Awareness is the key to transformation because it allows us to identify the patterns of compromise, the moments where we chose compliance over integrity. Through recognition, we begin to reclaim what we have lost, our voice, our boundaries, and our sense of worth. The process of confronting self-betrayal requires courage and honesty. It requires that we face uncomfortable truths about how often we have silenced ourselves, overlooked our own needs, or prioritized the comfort of others over our own wholeness. But with awareness comes clarity. We begin to see that the inner conflict was not punishment but a call to realign with our authentic self. It is a powerful teacher, guiding us to honor our own boundaries, speak our truths, and live in accordance with our values. Self-betrayal ultimately becomes a doorway that demands awareness and, when answered, leads to self-respect, authenticity, and the restoration of inner harmony. Boundaries are the invisible lines that protect our energy, our integrity, and our sense of self, yet for many people they remain dormant or unclear because they are entangled with fear. From a young age, we are often taught, either explicitly or implicitly, that saying no, asserting ourselves, or prioritizing our needs is selfish, unkind, or dangerous. These lessons embed a subtle, unconscious fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of angering others, or fear of losing connection. As a result, our natural ability to establish and maintain boundaries becomes muted. We live in a state of quiet compliance, accommodating others while suppressing our own needs and desires. Over time, this suppression generates tension, resentment, and confusion, because the self is constantly compromised to appease the perceived expectations of the external world. Boundaries are not born from rules or rigidity. They awaken when fear is seen clearly and replaced with the clarity that comes from self-awareness and self-respect. Unconscious fear is a powerful controller. It disguises itself as concern, politeness, or loyalty, convincing us that we must endure discomfort, overextend ourselves, or tolerate mistreatment to preserve relationships or avoid conflict. Yet fear is reactive, rooted in uncertainty and conditioned patterns rather than conscious choice. When decisions are made from fear, boundaries are blurred or ignored entirely. We may agree to things we do not want, tolerate behaviors that harm us, or suppress our voice to maintain peace. The energy of fear keeps the self in a state of contraction, preventing us from fully inhabiting our own life. Until fear is recognized and understood, boundaries remain weak, reactive, or inconsistent. Inner clarity emerges when we begin to observe our thoughts, emotions, and patterns without judgment. We start to distinguish between the impulse to comply out of fear and the impulse to act in alignment with our authentic self. Clarity is the moment of realization that our energy is finite, that our presence has value, and that protecting our well-being is not selfish, it is essential. With clarity, the mind sees that boundaries are not barriers to connection, but structures that allow relationships to thrive on honesty and respect. The fog of fear lifts, revealing the places where compromise was unnecessary and the areas where self-respect had been sacrificed. Clarity transforms decision-making from reactive to deliberate, empowering us to say yes when we genuinely want to, and no when something infringes on our integrity. As clarity deepens, boundaries awaken naturally. They are no longer rigid walls built out of distrust or anger. They are flexible, intelligent, and responsive. We learn to communicate our needs and limits with confidence, knowing that our truth is valid, even if it challenges others' expectations. The energy once spent on worry, guilt, or silent compliance is redirected toward presence, engagement, and authentic connection. Boundaries become a reflection of self-love rather than fear, a guide that maintains alignment with our inner values and priorities. When unconscious fear is replaced by clarity, boundaries shift from being a reaction to being a conscious expression of identity. We understand that the discomfort of asserting ourselves is temporary, while the cost of neglecting our needs is enduring. This awakening allows us to navigate relationships, work, and life itself with integrity, confidence, and freedom. Boundaries, once dormant and fragile, become a source of empowerment, peace, and self-respect, marking the transformation from living under fear to living in conscious alignment with our truest self. Guilt and discomfort are often misunderstood emotions. Many people immediately associate them with wrongdoing, selfishness, or moral failure. When we set boundaries, assert our needs, or make choices that prioritize our well-being, these feelings often arise, creating a sense of inner conflict. We may feel guilty for saying no, for refusing to meet someone else's expectations, or for choosing our own path over a familiar pattern that kept others comfortable. Discomfort may accompany these moments, manifesting as unease, anxiety, or a subtle sense of being out of place. While these emotions can feel unpleasant, they are not indicators of moral failure or selfishness. They are signals that growth is occurring, that the self is being realigned with authenticity, and that old patterns of compliance or self-abandonment are being challenged. Guilt emerges because we have been conditioned to equate self-prioritization with selfishness. From an early age, many people are taught that caring for oneself is secondary to caring for others, that sacrifice is synonymous with virtue, and that asserting personal boundaries is disruptive or rude. These teachings embed deep internalized rules that trigger guilt whenever we step outside the mold. The mind interprets this departure as a moral transgression, even though it is simply an act of self-respect. Discomfort functions in a similar way. It is the body and mind's response to breaking free from patterns that were previously unconscious. When we move away from familiar habits, even unhealthy ones, the nervous system resists because it is leaving the known for the unknown. The sensation of unease is part of the recalibration process. signaling that the self is being reorganized toward authenticity. Understanding guilt and discomfort as markers of growth requires a shift in perspective. Instead of interpreting these emotions as proof of wrongdoing, we can view them as indicators that the inner self is awakening. They signal that we are confronting conditioned behaviors, outdated beliefs, and unconscious fears that have long dictated our choices. Growth rarely occurs without tension. Just as muscles must endure strain to strengthen, the psyche must encounter discomfort to expand. Each pang of guilt or moment of unease is evidence that the self is negotiating old patterns and moving toward alignment with personal truth. It is also important to recognize that these feelings do not dictate action. They are signals, not commands. They invite reflection and discernment, prompting us to ask why we feel this way, what part of ourselves is being challenged, and whether the emotion arises from actual harm caused or from internalized conditioning. When we respond with awareness rather than automatic compliance, guilt and discomfort become teachers. They guide us in distinguishing between the false obligation imposed by fear and the authentic responsibility to our own well-being. Embracing this perspective transforms the experience of setting boundaries or choosing self-care. Actions that once triggered guilt are now understood as essential steps in reclaiming integrity and personal sovereignty. Discomfort is seen as temporary and purposeful, a necessary companion on the journey toward wholeness. In this way, guilt and discomfort are reframed from indicators of selfishness to proof of conscious evolution. They mark the path of self-discovery, resilience, and authentic living, reminding us that growth often requires facing internal resistance, questioning old narratives, and daring to honor the self unapologetically. True self-love is often misunderstood as something that can be earned, measured, or reinforced by others. Many people look outward for validation, approval, or recognition, believing that being praised, admired, or accepted by others confirms their worth. This reliance on external affirmation can create a fragile sense of self because it ties one's value to circumstances beyond control. Compliments, attention, or approval may provide temporary relief or pleasure, but they cannot establish lasting self-love. True self-love emerges not from what others think, say, or do, but from an internal alignment between one's values, choices, and authentic identity. It is the sense of being whole and grounded within oneself, independent of external validation. Inner alignment is the foundation of genuine self-love. It occurs when thoughts, emotions, actions, and intentions are coherent and consistent with one's deeper truths. When we act in accordance with our principles, speak honestly, and honor our boundaries, we create a sense of integrity that nurtures self-respect. This alignment allows the self to feel complete and sufficient, not because of approval from others, but because it is living authentically. Conversely, when actions are inconsistent with personal values, when we compromise, suppress desires, or prioritize the expectations of others above our own, the inner self experiences tension, dissatisfaction, and fragmentation. Self-love cannot flourish in this discord. It requires a foundation of authenticity, clarity, and conscious choice. External validation can mask inner misalignment, giving the illusion of self-worth. Praise, recognition, or social acceptance may feel comforting, yet if these experiences contradict one's inner truth, they are hollow. For example, someone might receive acclaim for achievements that do not resonate with their passions, or maintain relationships that demand compromise at the cost of integrity. In such cases, external validation may temporarily soothe the ego, but it cannot satisfy the deeper need for self-acceptance. True self-love, by contrast, is cultivated through awareness of one's own needs, desires, and boundaries, and through consistent alignment with these inner realities. The process of cultivating self-love through alignment often requires introspection, honesty, and courage. It involves recognizing patterns of seeking approval, distinguishing between genuine desire and obligation, and choosing actions that reflect one's authentic self. It may mean saying no when expected to say yes, pursuing a path that feels true rather than socially approved, or embracing aspects of oneself that were previously denied or judged. Each choice rooted in authenticity strengthens the connection to self, builds trust within, and deepens self-respect. When self-love emerges from inner alignment rather than external validation, it becomes enduring and resilient. Praise or criticism may still affect emotions temporarily, but they no longer define worth or dictate choices. The self becomes a reliable source of guidance, support, and affirmation. Confidence, contentment, and peace arise naturally because one is living in accordance with truth rather than chasing approval. This form of self-love is liberating. It frees individuals from dependency on others' perceptions, protects energy, and cultivates relationships that are based on mutual respect rather than neediness. In this way, self-love rooted in alignment is a quiet, steady, and unshakable force, arising from the integrity of living authentically and honoring one's own inner truth. Choosing yourself is one of the most transformative acts a person can undertake because it restores both inner wholeness and the ability to connect authentically with others. For much of life, many people operate from a place of compromise, sacrificing their needs, desires, and boundaries to maintain peace, gain approval, or meet the expectations of those around them. This pattern may feel necessary, even noble, but it gradually erodes a sense of completeness within. The self becomes fragmented, divided between the person one is living as and the person one truly is. This internal fragmentation often shows up in relationships as imbalance, resentment, or codependency, because the self that has been ignored or silenced seeks expression through connection. Choosing yourself is the act of reclaiming that neglected portion of your being, recognizing your own worth, and deciding to honor your needs and boundaries without apology. When you choose yourself, you are no longer living to fill someone else's expectations or to gain approval. This act requires honesty and courage, because it may initially create discomfort or resistance from others who are accustomed to the previous patterns of compromise. However, the very act of prioritizing your truth brings clarity to your interactions. Relationships that were previously sustained through obligation, fear, or habit are either transformed or naturally fall away. Those that remain do so on the foundation of mutual respect, authenticity, and alignment. In this way, choosing yourself does not isolate you, it purifies your connections, allowing you to engage fully and honestly with others without needing to perform or sacrifice your integrity. Inner wholeness is restored through the alignment that comes from self-prioritization. When your choices reflect your authentic needs, values, and desires, the internal split between who you are and who you've been pretending to be begins to heal. Energy that was once spent suppressing your voice, overextending, or people-pleasing is reclaimed, fueling confidence, clarity, and presence. This restored wholeness becomes a powerful anchor, enabling you to navigate life with integrity, make decisions that honor your boundaries, and face challenges with resilience. The self feels complete, not dependent on external validation, and capable of expressing love and care from a place of abundance rather than scarcity. Choosing yourself also enhances the quality of your relationships. When you are grounded in your own wholeness, you are able to engage without neediness, guilt, or resentment. Communication becomes more honest, interactions more balanced, and connections deeper. People are drawn to authenticity, and relationships that survive this shift are stronger because they are based on mutual understanding and respect, rather than codependence or convenience. Choosing yourself teaches both you and others the value of integrity and the importance of honoring one's needs, while still offering genuine care and presence. Ultimately, choosing yourself is not an act of selfishness, it is an act of restoration. It restores your inner harmony, your energy, and your capacity to love fully. It creates a life where choices are made from clarity, relationships are nurtured with honesty, and the self is treated as sacred rather than expendable. In this way, choosing yours self is the key to living authentically, cultivating meaningful connections, and reclaiming the wholeness that has always been your birthright. And so, the journey of saying no more is not a single moment. It is a series of choices, each one honoring the self a little more, reclaiming the voice that was silenced, and restoring the energy that was given away. When you choose yourself, you awaken a love that is steady, unwavering, and unconditional, a love that does not depend on others to validate it. You discover that true freedom comes not from pleasing the world, but from being fully present to your own truth. Relationships deepen in authenticity, life flows with clarity, and the self finally feels whole. Remember, the courage to say no more is the courage to choose yourself, and in that choice you will find the awakening of self-love that has always been waiting within you.